Howdy, and welcome to another episode here at Crazy for Texas. I'm your host, Amber, and our goal here at Crazy for Texas is to explore the treasures of Texas history buried right in our backyards. We strive to create a map for others inspired to follow and learn more about Texas beyond the textbook. Its people, towns, heritage, traditions, and the legends that led us to where we are today. Please share your stories or questions by email to any of our social media platforms. Let's learn from and alongside each other as we dig for another nugget of Texas history. For now, sit back, put your boots up, and get ready for another episode on Crazy for Texas. Welcome back. I hope you had a chance to go out to Anahuac this weekend to visit their annual Gator Fest. We took a quick trip out there to make a few TikTok videos for Crazy for Texas, and we could hear the airboats from several miles away. We made it out of there before it started to rain. I'm not sure where you're listening from, but we have been in a major drought in this area. I know you've heard about Texas weather. If you don't like it, just wait a little bit and it'll change. Not this summer. The heat and lack of rain stuck around all summer long, so the little showers that we've been getting are kind of definitely welcomed. It was a different kind of summer than we would have had when I was a kid. We'd be running around outside all day long, playing hide-and-go-seek, or even playing in the sprinklers. But man, even my students told me that it was just too hot for them to go play outside. You know, growing up, my daddy loved listening to talk radio. I'm not even sure what exactly he'd be listening to. Maybe the news with current events, or an Oiler football game, or I don't know, maybe it was the Astros. Anyways, I couldn't understand for the life of me why he enjoyed it, because it totally bored me. Now, as an adult, I get it. When I discovered podcasts, I was introduced to a whole new world of talk radio. When my husband Johnny and I decided to delve into the world of podcasting, I had so many interests. I even pitched the idea to call our show Kaleidoscope, to cover all the vastness of everything I could talk about, because remember, I love to talk. Then Johnny came up with the idea of sharing our love of Texas history. I was skeptical at first. I mean, we're kind of nerds. Not everybody enjoys history like we do. But when he reminded me of all the mayhem and legends out there, he was speaking to my inner crime junkie. Lord knows I love Ashley and Britt, and I can't forget my small town dicks. Johnny couldn't have chosen a better topic for our second episode. Not only is it from literally our own backyard in Anahuac, it includes an unsolved murder mystery ready for lots of speculation with a web of deception and a secret child. Daddy, this one's for you. We live in Chambers County, which is nestled between the east side of Houston and Beaumont. Chambers County is named after Thomas Jefferson Chambers, our Texas legend of the day. According to the Texas State Historical Association, Chambers was born April 13, 1802 in Orange County, Virginia. After his father died, when he was about 13, his family moved to Kentucky. Chambers ended up becoming a teacher and studying law. Hold on. Let me just take a moment here. When putting this all together, I wanted to race through the timeline of his life before Texas. That is until I recently found a letter that he'd written. Chambers was only about 17 and a half years old when he wrote the retired President Thomas Jefferson. Reading from the Founder Online National Archives. Penned, Winchester, Clark County, Kentucky, August 27, 1819. Dear Sir, early taught by my father to venerate you, now he is taken from me. I solicit a correspondence with you, that I may, by your wisdom and experience, become wise also. I am now at the most critical period of my life. My circumstances are embarrassed. My passions are violent and ungovernable, and without the advice of an intelligent friend, I am continually liable to be led by them into errors both of thought and action. I was born in 1802 in Orange County, Virginia, where I went to a country school occasionally until 1815 when my father died. My mother, perplexed with affairs and wanting my assistance, neglected to send me to school until 2 years afterwards when she moved to Kentucky and sent me to a boarding school 1 year, but poverty forced her to take me home. I have since supported myself by teaching school. My father was once very wealthy. He possessed lands in this state which would now sell for upwards of $100,000, but it was taken from him, owing, I believe, to some defect in his claim. By this means I have been deprived of an education which, since my earliest time, has been the greatest wish of my heart. I cannot expect to receive a great deal of instruction from you at such great a distance, but you can mark out the line of conduct which will be best for me to pursue in the future. As soon as I receive an answer, I will give you an account of my present circumstances. I hope you will excuse the liberty I have taken in writing you. Yours respectfully, Jefferson Chambers. After reading this letter, I had to pause. I was ashamed to think that I was so quick to get to the good stuff that I didn't take the time to think how his childhood and family shaped and molded him, just as each of our own childhoods, traumas, and upbringings shape us. Being 17 back then was way different than it is now, even though my own 17-year-old would try to put himself on the same responsibility level as him. Chambers was still a tender young man. With the candid bearing of his personal demons, I guess you could say it humanized him. But as a foreshadowing to his future dealings and what he thought of himself, I also had to temper my empathy with the understanding it's an explanation for his future behavior, not an excuse. Young Thomas Jefferson Chambers was just trying to make a way in this world while trying not to fall into the same mistakes as his father. Who'd better to ask than his namesake, former President Thomas Jefferson? I'm not sure if a response ever came, but I do know that after his time in Kentucky, Chambers moved to Alabama and worked his way down to Mexico, where he was able to learn the language and Mexican culture. Thomas Jefferson Chambers was able to make some pretty prominent connections while translating for some businessmen. According to Margaret Henson in the Handbook of Texas, Chambers' relations with the vice governor of Coahuila and Texas, Victor Blanco, led to him becoming a licensed land surveyor and even becoming Survey General of Texas in 1829. With the instatement of the law of April 6, 1830, prohibiting U.S. immigration to the Mexican land of Texas, Chambers and his land commissioner partner, Juan Padilla, were tasked with surveying land claims, issuing titles to those that had settled and lived in Texas prior to 1827. His partner got into a little personal legal trouble, and their work issuing land titles and surveying land had to halt until he was replaced. Thomas Jefferson Chambers was then named as the paid agent at the legislature for East Texas residents. For his employment, Chambers received 11 leagues of land. As mentioned in Episode 1, a league of land was about 4,600 acres. These leagues were located in the counties of Ellis, Chambers, Navarro, Liberty, and Hayes. Now, I'm not sure if that means anything to you, because only growing up in Harris and Fort Bend counties, I had no idea where these were located. So I had to look them up to visualize it. So let's try this again. He received land located in Waxahachie, Ellis County; Corsicana, Navarro County; the east side of Baytown, Mount Bellevue, and Anahuac, Chambers County; Cleveland, Dayton, Liberty, Plum Grove, and Hardin in Liberty County; Kyle, Buda, Austin, Dripping Springs, Hayes, Wimberley, and Driftwood in Hayes County. Not knowing the areas of these counties, I pictured Chambers receiving one giant piece of land, but now I realize that they were given us several different tracts. At any rate, at this point, he had acquired about 50,000 acres of Texas land to call his own. I wonder if this is where his land lust began, because although it was illegal for non-native Mexicans to purchase Texas tracts of land, Chambers worked his connections and purchased a 5-league tract of land around Turtle Bay from Vincent Padilla. Sound familiar? I thought so too. Ken Wise from Wise About Texas explained that he was actually related to Chambers' land commissioner partner, Juan Padilla. While the land in question had conveniently just been surveyed and titled only about 25 days prior to the purchase date. Although it was loophole legal, this did not sit well with the residents of the area that had resided there before Chambers had acquired it. But I don't think that much bothered him now that he owned a little over 70,000 acres of Texas land. As I mentioned earlier, before Thomas Jefferson Chambers came to Texas, he did spend some time in Mexico learning the language and customs of the people. Although that is true, I'm not sure that it was his love of the Mexicans and their culture that incited his decision to become a naturalized Mexican citizen in 1830, rather than a show of those ungovernable passions he foretold. He then became the only foreigner to be given the special license and permission to practice law in Mexico when Anglos were not allowed without it. Only 1 month after obtaining his license, Chambers was named state attorney for Texas in March of 1834. But, he just resigned only after 2 months. In June of that same year, he was later named Chief Justice and maintained that office for about a year and a half, being compensated with more land. Although he was awarded 30 additional leagues, unfortunately, some of the land that he was given was land that was already spoken for. So out of the 30 leagues, he was only able to locate about 13 of them before the land offices closed with the Texas Revolution. So, at this point, Chambers has officially 29 leagues of land altogether. He is now up to 133,000 acres. Joan McConnell, a reporter for the Baytown Sun, goes as far to explain Chambers was one of the largest landowners in Texas at the start of the war between Texas and Mexico. Now, because of his connections with the Mexican government, Chambers' allegiance was often questioned, especially during the Anahuac disturbances. Being in the Mexican government, he tried to settle down those Texian rebels. The Texians publicly ended up humiliating him and Brazoria in response. In an attempt to save face, Chambers published a pamphlet to defend his actions and inaction. Because of his continued support of the Mexican government, the General Council of Texas denounced Chambers. This was a pretty big deal, considering, according to Ralph W. Steen in the Handbook of Texas, the General Council of Texas was the provisional government prior to the Texas Revolution. Now, his full support of the Texas Revolution began to evolve only after the victory at the Battle of Gonzales on October 2nd, 1835. With his change of heart and full allegiance laced with gumption, in the Handbook of Texas, Miss Henson explains, Thomas Jefferson Chambers requested the rank, did you get that? He requested the rank of Major General in return for raising and equipping 1,145 volunteers, the Army of Reserve, in the United States that would be marched to Texas by May 15th, using his own credit to be repaid back by Texas. To further his audacity, according to an article on the Texas Military Forces Museum website, Bruce Marshall explains that Chambers had a special uniform made for himself to include extra stars and a gold belt instead of the standard black belt. It is clear Thomas Jefferson Chambers wanted others to see him as great as he saw himself, even if he couldn't fulfill his grand intentions and promises. You see, May 15th passed with no word from Major General Chambers or his troops. He finally returned to Texas a year and 5 months after the Battle of San Jacinto was won and Texas was officially an independent republic. Even though he did not come through with his side of the bargain, Chambers made sure to hand over his receipts totaling $23,621. Repayment was approved, but not cashed out because honestly at that time Texas just didn't have any money to repay him. However, for his quote-unquote service as Major General, he was compensated with, you guessed it, more land. An additional 1,280 acres was added to his name. Now, I have to admit, I do not know much about politics, but I do know the name of General Colin Powell. I can't tell you what wars he served in, but I do know that he did a lot with the U.S. Department of Defense after earning the rank of a 4-star general. I'm sure he had a bona fide uniform with genuine stars. But anyways, with General Powell in mind, I'm wondering just how in the world Major General Chambers earned such a title with how little he produced. And you know what? I'm not the only one. David G. Burnett, Texas' first interim president, had quite a bit to say against Chambers as they feuded publicly back and forth, taking out pages in the newspaper for all to see. Podcaster and Justice Ken Wise gives a detailed account of their bickering in his podcast, episode 16 of Wise About Texas. You should really go check him out. In December of 1837, Chambers became a founding member of the Texas Philosophical Society, which is still in existence today, 185 years later. Alongside Chambers, Other well-known charter members include Marabou B. Lamar, Ashbel Smith, Anson Jones, David G. Burnett, Patrick C. Jack, Sam Houston, and a few others. Herbert P. Gambrell from the Handbook of Texas quotes the purpose of the organization was stated as the collection and diffusion of correct information regarding the moral and social condition of our country, its finances, statistics, and political and military history, its climate, soil and productions, animals, aboriginal tribes, natural curiosities, mines, and the thousand other topics of interest which our new and rising republic unfolds to the philosopher, the scholar, and the man of the world. I don't know about you, but I kind of zoned out after reading diffusion of correct information regarding the moral. I'm not sure which of Chambers' credentials was used to validate his entry, but I have to remember that although his motives and actions were often questionable or suspect at times, he did make contributions to Texas and its rise to an independent nation. After an unsuccessful bid to the Texas Senate in 1835, the following year, Chambers retired and took residence at his home in Round Point, which, according to the Historical Marker database, was only about 3 miles south of Anahuac. Thomas Jefferson Chambers changed the name of the town to Chambersia in his likeness, and disrupted the town with his intent to sell city lots. The residents of Round Point, Chambersia, were not pleased. Simultaneously, in 1839, remember that land that Chambers had acquired in Hayes County? Well, it had also come under dispute when Texas Congress located the capital at Waterloo, today known as Austin, which had belonged to, you guessed it, T.J. Chambers himself. And so another land dispute erupted. In 1842, after an unsuccessful trip to the U.S. to sell some of his land to raise some money, he returned to find his home, Round Point, to have been sold to John O'Brien, who purchased Chambers' entire 5-league Padilla tract for the back taxes that he had owed. Chambers took O'Brien to court and lost. Well, the land rightfully went to the recent buyer, and Chambers was so angry with the loss, he shot and killed John O'Brien in 1843. I'm guessing his violent passions were still ruling his thoughts and actions. I wonder if he realized how prophetic his profession to President Thomas Jefferson would be. I don't know how he escaped it, but Chambers was not indicted for the murder and brazenly took back Round Point. Mrs. O'Brien didn't back down, though, continuing her husband's plot, and took the case all the way to the Supreme Court in 1855, where it was ruled once again in the O'Briens' favor. Unfortunately, these were not isolated incidences of land conflicts for Chambers, though given it was his only murder. I have to wonder, did he fight so vehemently for his land because of what happened to his father? Because he had quite a few of them. Thomas Jefferson Chambers and Charles Wilcox were in a feud over the ownership of Anahuac. As I mentioned in episode 1, Wilcox had his own connections to the area and people. He had opened up his own store in 1831, served as Justice of the Peace in Anahuac in 1836 and 1846 when he was also postmaster. Now I can see how land disputes would be common back then without the aid of Google Maps or even barbed wire fences, but I have a feeling it wasn't the case of unintentional squatting someone else's land in these land disputes. Maybe Chambers felt so entitled after the county was named after him in 1858 with the merging of Jefferson and Liberty counties. Wilcox and Chambers went back and forth until finally it went to court. A legal battle ensued, and once again Chambers lost with a ruling in favor of Wilcox in 1862. A judge's ruling could not calm their quarreling, but a bullet could. Their conflict with one another continued until Chambers was mysteriously assassinated in 1865. But, let's not get ahead of ourselves. After Chambers had incredulously shot and killed O'Brien, and while in litigation with his widow, the Handbook of Texas reports Thomas Jefferson Chambers married Abigail Annie Chubb in 1851. I was not able to find out where they met, but the Baytown Sun reported that she was living in Galveston. I'm left to wonder if she knew what she was getting herself into with marrying him. Did she find his aggressive lust for land attractive? Did she find his vengeful killing as brawn, giving her a sense that she would be protected? Or was this a marriage of connection, just like so many were back then? Whatever the appeal, they married and had Miss Kate Abigail in 1852 and Miss Stella in 1864, a mere 6 months before her father was mysteriously murdered. Chambers and his family lived in the home called Chambersea in Anahuac. To give you a visual, we have posted some of our pictures on our website and a couple of TikToks so that you could see what I'm describing. A 1981 article in the Baytown Sun describes the house as unique, to say the least. In a show of his Texas pride, he had a stained glass window fashioned as the Texas 5-point star. Although the outside of the structure was basic Greek revival style of architecture with borrowed elements of the Louisiana influence, there were some strange additions that just might lend to a Chambers fearing for his life. Chambersea consisted of 2 stories. The upper level consisted of 2 unconnected rooms, which were only accessible from a narrow, winding staircase located on the outside of the house. So when they wanted to go upstairs, they would have to go outside on the porch, go up this winding staircase, and then enter the upstairs part of the house that way. Now, the doorways to the house were also far narrower than usual. They only allowed entrance of 1 person at a time. These features may have been a direct reflection of paranoia, as Miss Villamay Williams, a local historian, describes Chambers in that same Baytown Sun article. She describes him as always having been on the lookout for a fight and may have feared for his life. She even shared an account that Chambers' adversaries drew straws to decide who would be his assassin. Catherine Sturgis Evans, the granddaughter of Chambers, reports that he was home from the Civil War, healing up from a minor wound and spending time with his wife and daughters on March 15, 1865. While together in one of the upstairs rooms, a shot was fired, killing Thomas Jefferson Chambers. These are the only absolutes that we know. I mean, it's hard to name a murderer with varying accounts, tons of speculation, and a fistful of straws. Miss Evans, his granddaughter, remembered that in no way, shape, or form could have been there, and only shared this account based on what family had shared with her. She reports that her grandfather Chambers was holding baby Stella while sitting in the room, while his slave, Nanny Williams, was exiting the room when she heard bang! A shot rang out. She turned to look back and found him on the floor with his wife holding him, hearing a horse galloping off in the dark. However, according to Miss Nanny, her first account, she said that she heard Mrs. Chambers yelling to the cook, Aunt Maria, General Chambers has shot himself, come quick." And later she rescinded that account, assuring the others that he had in fact not shot himself, but was shot through a window. Other contradictions would include the location of his fatal wound. One account reports a single shot to the heart, while a different account details a shot to the side of the head and neck with a multi-pellet shot from the limb of a tree near the house. Legend has it that a portrait hung in the room where Chambers was killed, and it had a bullet hole punctured in the image exactly where he had been lethally shot. Although I've not seen the portrait myself, Mrs. Williams, the historian, advised experts have verified this account. I have, however, seen the double-barrel shotgun that was allegedly used to kill Chambers, and you can see it too. In the Baytown Sun 1981 article, Mrs. Williams, the historian, reported a descendant of one of the people who had a land feud with Chambers delivered the gun encased in a gunny sack to the grandfather of Booster Stevenson back in 1966, a little over 100 years after the shooting. All that is reported is that the bearer stated, "This is the gun that killed General Chambers." The gun is now on display at the Chambers County Museum at Wallaceville. No one was ever arrested or even charged with his murder. According to the Handbook of Texas, it is believed that Albert V. Wilcox, the son of Charles Wilcox, did it. Remember what Chambers had done to John O'Brien after winning the court battle over the land dispute? I could see why Albert might have wanted to protect his father. But 3 years after Charles Wilcox had won in court? I'm not too sure. Honestly, there are a few things I'm not too sure about. So we have two different accounts from Nanny Williams. We also have two different descriptions of wounds that could have come from two different types of ammunition, one of which is backed up from the validation of a shot going through Chambers' body into a portrait on the wall behind him, which would not support being shot by a double-barrel shotgun from a tree outside the house, but what it would support is a close-range shot inside the house. From what I've learned about Thomas Jefferson Chambers, I would not gamble any money on him shooting himself, so perhaps there was somebody else inside the house that did it. Unfortunately, they didn't have CSI Anahuac, and honestly, they handled things a lot differently then than they do today. This is a rabbit hole that I would love to go down. There is so much room for theories and speculation, but I'm here to share the facts about history. But it's also a fact that I'm a little confused about the facts represented. If you have a better grasp of what happened or can explain the trajectory of a shotgun shot from a tree through a window and through a human body, maybe you have an account to share with us that maybe has traveled down your family tree, or maybe you want to share your own speculation. Please send me an email. Let's have coffee, or perhaps this might be a topic for another episode if there's enough interest. Okay, back to the facts. After Chambers' death, he was buried near his home, but Annie and the girls were said to have never returned to their family home of Chambersy. After about a year, Mrs. Chambers had her husband moved to the Galveston Episcopal Cemetery. Interesting enough, according to Miss Henson from the Handbook of Texas, the widow sold Chambers' wharf, warehouse, and home to none other than her dead husband's mortal enemy, Charles Wilcox. Are you as stunned as I was? I'm not sure how it came about, but I do know that General Chambers must have been turning in his grave. Even though after death he ultimately lost his land to Wilcox, Thomas Jefferson Chambers did have a victory in the land dispute over the land for the capital of Texas in the city of Austin. In 1925, the Texas legislature awarded $20,000 to his daughters Kate and Stella Chambers. Now, normally, this would be the time where I thank you for listening and ask you to reach out to us with your thoughts and suggestions, but the story doesn't end here. It is my voice that you hear, but there's a huge piece of Crazy for Texas that you don't know much about. He is the heart and inspiration for this venture, and we wouldn't be here without him. My honey bear, my husband and producer, Johnny. Let me give you a little background on what happens behind the scenes. Johnny researches and tries to find all sorts of articles to cross-reference my information, trying to keep me honest, and pictures to share on the website for Crazy for Texas, so you can see what we see. During his research, he came across an online article for Bluebonnet News entitled Historians Looking for Descendants of People Buried at Walter Brown Cemetery in Chambers County. In this article, a bombshell was dropped in the middle of our investigation as he read the words from Thomas Jefferson Chambers' great-great-granddaughter, Regina St. Romain, from his illegitimate daughter, Amanda Chambers Gale, that is buried there in the Walter Brown Cemetery. Understand, this was the first that we'd ever read or heard of her. Johnny has a huge passion for Find-A-Grave. Over the years, he has connected our relatives, and we've even taken pictures of grave sites and found personal photos to upload and connect to them as well. After reading the article, Johnny visited the Find-A-Grave for Thomas Jefferson Chambers and found listed as his third daughter, Amanda Chambers Gale. She's even listed as the half-sister for his known daughters of Kate and Stella on their own Find-A-Graves. Knowing that Miss Amanda was not mentioned in any of the articles or podcasts we'd researched, we went on a quest to find her, as it seems she had been buried in history far before her own death. Before I introduce you to Miss Amanda, I want you to know that we take this job very seriously. There's a responsibility to not only share what history has been scribed or shared, but there's also a human side that entangles the hearts and emotions of those still with us today. Prior to creating this episode, I spoke with Amanda Chambers Gale, great-granddaughter, to validate the information that we discovered, explaining my desire not to sensationalize her, but honor her. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Thomas Jefferson Chambers' youngest daughter, Amanda Chambers Gale. Thomas Jefferson Chambers had a daughter with his servant, Harriet Abraham Jackson. According to an online article on Hub Pages, Ms. Romaine reports Mrs. Chambers and Miss Harriet were pregnant at the same time. Stella was born in September of 1864, and baby Amanda was born March of 1865, the very month that her father was shot and killed. Little is known about Amanda's side from the fact that she's not mentioned in the life of Thomas Jefferson Chambers or her sisters. I know relationships between slave owners and their slaves occurred often. I mean, look at his namesake Thomas Jefferson's affair with his Harriet. I know most of those relations were not laced with love and affection as our former president expressed in his own. It is unclear if Amanda was born from love or rape. In speaking with Thomas Jefferson Chambers' great-great-granddaughter, Regina St. Romaine, she shared she'd had no idea of their connection until she was an adult. I guess this just wasn't a closed topic for the Chambers family, but also for the Gale family as well. We know that Amanda Chambers married Mr. Nathan Gale and lived in Baytown, just miles away from Anahuac and a little further out from Galveston, where her half-sisters moved. She is buried in the Walter Brown Cemetery, located in the old Winfrey area of Chambers County. Her cement slab headstone with the hand-carved inscription of her name and dates of birth and death pale in comparison to those of her father and sisters located in the Galveston Episcopal Cemetery. I don't want to take away from the daddy that raised and cared for Miss Amanda. I do, however, want her to be remembered and not buried in history as she has been all these years. My hope is that one day our history books will include her as a child of Thomas Jefferson Chambers, even if she wasn't recognized as an heir to the Chamber name. We would like to one day make an episode about the life of Amanda Chambers Gale in the historic, yet little-known, Walter Brown Cemetery, the burial place of African American vets of World War I, World War II, Vietnam, the Civil War, and the descendants of slaves, sharecroppers, and others dating back to the 1800s. If you get the opportunity, you can visit Thomas Jefferson Chambers' home, Chambersea, in Anahuac. While visiting myself, I got to meet and visit with a local that shared it is common to have prom and wedding pictures taken at the steps of this historic home. Hey, Chris. It was great visiting with you guys. I would also urge you to go and visit the Chambers County Museum at Wallaceville. They have quite a collection of items from the past. Miss Mary Hughes was so generous with her time and insight. If you get a chance to visit, let her know we sent you. I want to also give a special thank you to Regina St. Romaine for calling me back. It was so special visiting with you about Miss Amanda. We posted some of the family photos she shared with Crazy for Texas. Now we also want to give a shout out to the winners of our TikTok challenge. This week we actually have two winners. Jen from Baytown, Texas responded first on a Facebook post, and Kimberly from Pinehurst, Texas was the first to post the correct answer on TikTok. Thank y'all for playing and showing us that we're not the only ones that are crazy for Texas. I want to leave you with one final thought. History has a way of dehumanizing those that make it as we focus on the dates, their accomplishments, impacts, both positive and negative. These people that we study put on their pants and had to use the restroom just the same as we have to today. They had emotions, jubilees, and heartbreak just as we do. We can see their footprints, but we have too much insight and blessings to be able to objectively walk in their shoes. Please listen with grace, along with a desire to find the hidden history buried in our own backyards. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please be sure to subscribe and leave us a 5-star review so we can grow and reach more listeners. To hold you over until our next adventure, visit us at crazyfortexas.net for more information and content about our explorations of the history of our great state of Texas beyond the textbook. Be sure to also check us out on YouTube and Facebook at Crazy for Texas and on TikTok at crazyfortexas.net. Remember, if you have any questions or suggestions about an episode you've heard, or even if you have an idea or a piece of your own history that's been passed down your family tree that you'd like us to explore for a future show, please contact me at host@crazyfortexas.net. Until next time.